I am 1/4 Cuban. My grandpa was born in Cuba. He lived there until he was 18, and then he was offered by an American to come to the US, and my grandpa accepted that offer. And this was before Castro. It was like around 1952, I believe. So my grandpa's a full-blooded Hispanic. He's about as Hispanic as Cuban as can be. He came to America knowing pretty much no English, pretty much nothing about American culture, what I'll call white culture. So my grandpa cannot be accused of being a white person because he was not. He's a Cuban person. He married a white woman from South Carolina, my grandma. They gave birth to 4 children, one of which is my mother, Delinda de Armas Taylor. My mother is half Cuban, and she married a white man, my dad, Larry Taylor. So I'm the first generation of the de Armas family where I can officially say I'm a white person. I'm more European than I am Cuban. I'm only 1/4 Cuban. But I believe because of my background, I have a legitimate argument against. I have a friend named Chris. I don't think he minds. I hope he doesn't mind if I talk about him publicly. But he represents a certain trend among black people who really tend to feel free to talk about the oppression of whiteness, the oppression of white culture on black Americans. And so I've kind of been dialoguing with him a little bit on his Facebook statuses. It would be impossible to describe the full extent of Chris and my interactions thus far. I will say it's been peaceful. It's been productive, fruitful dialogue. We both seem to have the same end goal of wanting to be friends. There's nothing that stops us from being friends or anything like that. But I do oppose some of the ways he tends to express himself concerning the dominance of whiteness in America. I still have a lot to talk to him about because I'm not totally sure what he means on everything. But I'm making this video because I want to address a tendency among people like Chris, among black people like Chris, who tend to divide the world into these kind of spheres of, from Chris's perspective, he would say, I'm a black person, you're a white person, you can't really tell me what to say about my legitimate black experience, that kind of thing. To a certain extent, I see where Chris is coming from, and I agree with a lot of what he says. I'm sorry for Chris because I can't properly represent his views on a video on my account. Maybe in the future he and I will have a dialogue of some kind that we will be able to publish, but basically my main point is my family history, the de Armas history of my grandpa coming from Cuba, is a good representation of what it should look like when 2 opposing cultures come together. My white grandmother, South Carolina, about as white as you can come. And my grandpa, about as Cuban as you can come, born and raised in Cuba. Came to America knowing no English. That dynamic. The 2 of them fell in love. They became, in a sense, by creating a family, they became one culture. 2 cultures become one culture through their marriage. They have children. Another interesting fact, my mom, who was when she was in 1st through 6th grade, this was the early 70s probably, a time where racial divisions between whites and blacks were obviously not the greatest. My mom went to an all-black elementary school, 1st through 6th grade. So we had that experience in my diverse family of diversity. And no one could ever predict this by looking at me. I'm from on a superficial perspective, the surface level perspective. I've grown up in a what people would call a white culture. But why I oppose Chris's sometimes dividing the world into, from his perspective, I'm black, you're white, that way of thinking. The reason why I oppose that is because that's not at all the way my family has worked at all. My grandpa, I love my grandpa. When I interact with him, there's no sort of dynamic of, Zeke, you're white, I'm Cuban, I have my opinions about white people, leave those to me. You can stay over where you are in your white culture. No, my grandpa and I are able to relate on a basic human level. Our cultures have, to the extent that they can unite, our cultures have united. It's not that race is no longer a discussion. It's not that we try to ignore the fact that race exists and that my grandpa still has a very thick Cuban accent. No, we still celebrate the Cuban part of his culture, but because I've seen such a great example of my family being able to unite white and Hispanic so wonderfully, such a great example of that, I just have trouble when I hear some of Chris's opinions about kind of dividing, when he says, I'm black, you're white, whiteness is dominating America. Just, even though a lot of what he says is true, just his whole way of dealing with the situation seems non-productive. It doesn't seem to be leading to the kind of unity that I've experienced in my family. So I felt compelled to make this video because I think there are very few white people like me who have the experience of diversity that I have. But I know that because there are very few white people who have my kind of experience, they're not able to say, well, I've seen it work before. I've seen white culture intermix with Hispanics, with blacks, in my own family before. Because they don't have that kind of hard evidence, it's hard for people to take them seriously. So I'm coming out, I'm trying to speak on behalf of a new way of approaching the racial discussion, because I don't really like the trend that racial dialogue is tending toward. I think we should much more be focusing on the ways we can unite with each other, the ways the beauties of our culture can kind of blend and share the best parts of themselves with one another. So yeah, this is just the first video of what I hope will be among many, talking about the need for a new approach to the racial discussion. So that's all I have to say. Look forward to maybe hearing some of your thoughts on the comments and talking to you soon.